They managed to pass, and so they left the carpet in Caesar's room. "We have come to leave you a gift, sir. Cleopatra sent it to you," said the men. Caesar said in surprise, "Leave it, I will open it later," but Apollodorus approached him and said, "Cleopatra asked us to open the carpet here in front of her, and it is very important to comply with her orders." The Romans did not hesitate and said they could do it. He stood watching while they unrolled the luxurious carpet, and when they were about to unroll the last layer, he was confused. A few moans caught Caesar's attention. He drew nearer and saw the excellent Cleopatra lying on the carpet. He went all over her body with his eyes, for the Egyptian was lovely. Caesar was truly shocked, for he knew that she may not reach Alexandria. They were cleared out alone. In July, Caesar gave Cleopatra his hand to stand up and said to her that it could be a joy to meet the one they say to be a goddess, and Cleopatra answered, "I am the girl of Isis. I am a goddess and ruler of Egypt." Julius Caesar grinned and told her that, at that minute, she was not welcome. Be that as it may, Cleopatra's sweet words and her erotic motions made Julius Caesar yield at her feet. Cleopatra, seeing that the Roman was insane about her, took advantage and told him to assist her to recapture the position of authority and claimed that she was much better and more intelligent than her brother. Cleopatra thought that in the event that Julius Caesar sided with her, getting freed of her brother would be much less demanding, and other than that, she would be secure in Alexandria. While that was going on, the Romans surrendered to the charms of the foremost excellent lady in Egypt and gave in to her, and so they had an undertaking. Julius Caesar took the kill of Pompey as a culmination pardon, to question the devotion of Ptolemy, and in this way declared his bolster for Cleopatra to recapture his office. This lethal news rankled Ptolemy, and he chose to announce war on the Romans since, being an Egyptian territory, the Romans' drawbacks were outstanding, which guaranteed Ptolemy that he would win. Cleopatra recaptured her position, took once more the part of ruler of Alexandria, and started to run the show, concurring to her interface with Caesar. As her fundamental partner, Ptolemy sent equipped troops to go up against the Roman ships. Julius Caesar had as of now asked for fortifications, and when these arrived, a great fight opened within the waters of the Nile River. Caesar's cleverness gave him an advantage over the Egyptians, and his techniques devastated entire ships and caused them to be destroyed within the conclusion. Ptolemy's armed force misplaced his men in a grotesque way, since the fortifications of the Roman common had indeed arrived and the Pharaoh himself chose to battle. In any case, luckiness was not in his favor, since his transport was assaulted with more fury until it was wrecked within the waters of the Nile. The fight calmed down, and after the ruler of Egypt kicked the bucket suffocating in its waters, Caesar appeared his quality and took this truth as an awesome triumph and celebrated it on high. The Romans and Cleopatra were chosen to create a trip down the Nile, where they lived and cherished it enthusiastically. Although, at first, Cleopatra started this love affair as a strategy to regain power, on her return, Cleopatra took power as never before and established several reforms that made Egypt rise, because they were going through an extremely delicate moment where they were about to fall as an empire. However, Cleopatra's vivacity made her empire the most recognized. At that time, a few months later, Cleopatra gave birth to a beautiful child, whom she named Ptolemy Caesar and was better known as Caesarion. A product of her affair was Caesar. Everyone in the kingdom knew that Cleopatra was having an affair with the Romans, although she was married to his brother Ptolemy XIV. The monarch continued with her beloved Julius Caesar. A couple of years passed, and the Romans decided to return to Rome, as it was known that in the empire, he would receive great awards, recognition, and praise for being a great conqueror and warrior, Thus Cleopatra and Caesar bid farewell to the Roman awaiting his speedy return. When Caesar arrived in Rome, great celebrations were held, and he was named dictator for the life of the nation. Thus, the Romans had become men of much power and prestige. However, Alexandria under Cleopatra's rule was much more prosperous. Up to that time, several years passed, and Alexandria grew steadily and positioned itself as one of the most important and prosperous empires, thanks to Cleopatra's great government strategies. One day, Caesar and his mother organized an expedition to travel to Rome to share political strategies and alliances, which were very important for the empires, but also to introduce his son, who would be the successor of his father. When he died and thus ruled Rome, when Cleopatra arrived, she was not very welcomed by the people. Because Julius Caesar was married, the arrival of the Egyptian and her relationship with the monarch of Rome were frowned upon. Cleopatra, regardless of the rumors, settled in the royal house with her son and thus spent several months in Rome. Julius Caesar led several conquests, and at that time his power was exorbitant to such an extent that the Roman elite and the highest Roman officials were losing power. Seeing Caesar's actions with Cleopatra, several Roman senators started a small political revolt to end Caesar's reign, and so they summoned the monarch to a secret meeting, and while there, they assassinated him. The terrible news came the next morning. Julius Caesar had died at the hands of false leaders who sought power over him, and so the throne was ready for a new ruler. Mark Antony, Julius Caesar's right-hand man, took the reins of the kingdom for a few days while the funeral rites took place, and thus also began a quest to avenge the death of Rome's dictator. On the other hand, Cleopatra saw her son's chance at last, and after the funeral, the administrator of the kingdom read the Roman will in the main square, to be heard by all the people. When the will was read, Caesar was nowhere to be found as he was considered an illegitimate son, so Julius Caesar had to ignore it. Cleopatra was furious, as she had left absolutely nothing to her son and had not even considered him a ruler, as he had left the position to his nephew Octavian. At this point, Cleopatra's day was no longer safe, for at any moment, they could attack her. Now, without Julius Caesar, she was in hostile lands. So she gathered her contingent and returned to Alexandria to continue her great government, and on the way, Cleopatra thought of a way to rule entirely alone, and so she ordered her to kill her brother Ptolemy XIV to stay on the throne forever. The arrangement was given, and so her corolla passed on at the hands of his sister alone, in the position of royalty. Cleopatra started to run the show amazingly. Alexandria did not halt developing, and the plenitude was lucky for other kingdoms in Rome. Antony needed to meet with Cleopatra, so he sent an emissary to Alexandria with a letter to the Egyptian ruler, and when the news came, the ruler did not delay going to that assembly. The Roman Mark Antony had sighted in bone structure, so the ruler quickly arranged an expansive dispatch for his trip. Antony was as of now in bone structure, holding up for the wonderful Cleopatra, until one evening the dispatch of the ruler touched them arrive. An excellent transport with purple sails carried the ruler, her paddles were silver and gold. Cleopatra appeared to have status control and riches, and the dispatch that Egypt had was so amazing that Antony himself was staggered to see such a gigantic vessel. All the individuals deserted their obligations to provide a triumphal entrance to the one who claimed to be a goddess, since her title was well known in a few regions. On the other hand, Antony, since he met Cleopatra, was profoundly in awe with her excellence charm. An insight that captivated the Romans, be that as it may, he might not uncover himself sometime recently in his domain. The gathering and celebration were radiant since they accepted that the Egyptian ruler merited the finest of her individuals. Stamp Antony received her with respect, so they settled within the regal royal residence, where both held awesome gatherings for the political great of the realms, but Check Antony was trying to find something more. He lauded the ruler and, with sweet words, looked for the cherish of the Egyptians to Roman surprise. Cleopatra was charmed with him, and so he continuously responded. Both went through a few months in the bone structure, and after that, in Alexandria, where they fulfilled their cherish, their sentiment was official in Egypt. In spite of the fact that Mark Antony was hitched in Rome, he proceeded with his sentiment. Since he was profoundly in cherish with the ruler, a few months passed, and within the illustrious royal residence, it was reported that Cleopatra had given birth to twin children. The siblings of Check Antony were born, and as they were born, the Romans named the children as his beneficiaries and successors. In this way, the partners named them Helios, which implies the sun, and Selene, which suggests the moon. Before long after the birth of their revered children, Stamp Antony had to return to Rome for political matters. However, he did not need to take off his adored Cleopatra, since he felt that without her, he may not proceed. When he arrived in Rome, Octavian gotten him and designated them a few regal duties concerning their regions. His spouse Fulvia gotten him with delight since it had been a long time since she had seen him, but Check Antony was far off, and as much as he needed to take off his spouse, he could not do it. The Roman was continuously on the post for Cleopatra. He might not disregard her charms, but indeed, he may not forsake his position and remain in Rome, satisfying his regal obligations. In the long run, an uncommon malady struck Phobia, no matter how much she was treated. She could not recoup, and before long, she kicked the bucket. It was a really troublesome time for Marcus, be that as it may. It was the idealized opportunity for him and his adored Cleopatra to be together once more, and this time unreservedly, and presently he would not be branded as an adulterer. Stamp Antony's plans to return to Alexandria with the ruler were baffled by Octavian. Since he was completely against the Adore undertaking, they had to maintain a strategic distance from such a union. He proposed to Check that he wed Octavian, his sister, as Chamber of Rome. Mark Antony had to present a good image and obey the king's orders, so a wedding took place, they got married, and a few years later, 3 children were born. Octavian had some internal conflicts. Started. Lepidus and Mark Antony claimed power over several territories, creating an obvious rivalry between the Romans. However, Lepidus got tired of fighting and eventually withdrew from politics, leading to a major struggle between Mark Antony and Octavian for power. In the end, they both shared power in Rome, so Antony having conquered the eastern provinces, Octavian conquered the west. However, their conflict was not over yet when Mark Antony met Cleopatra in the city of Antioch and, despite being married, ran into the arms of her true love. After breaking up with Octavian, the two were deeply in love, and their love was successful after their reunion. Cleopatra took Mark Antony to Alexandria, and being there made their union official. Both ruled with intelligence, and Cleopatra's strategies made Egypt prosper rapidly, and the people were happy because the beautiful Egyptian queen had managed to consolidate a powerful empire and was very feared by many for several years. They lived together in Alexandria with great celebrations, riches, and abundance. Cleopatra became the woman with more power among all the empires and was highly respected. Several conflicts in Syria made Octavian turn to Egypt because his army was sheltered in that territory, so they had to flee after the revolts. The Roman sovereign was extremely angry and wanted to end the romance between Cleopatra and his former ally Mark Antony because he had abandoned his sister in Rome for a foreigner and also because he feared losing part of the Roman Empire. That was under the command of Mark Antony. Thus, Octavian began a civil war against the supporters of the consul Antony. As a result, a great battle took place in the waters of Greece. Cleopatra trusted the army that consolidated her beloved, so she decided to accompany him in battle. The confrontation was disastrous, and the great army of Octavian had finished with much of the contingent of Antony. So Cleopatra decided to return to Alexandria, as the defeat was marked. Once she entered the palace, Cleopatra announced to her allies and subjects of false victory that she would seek more political ties with other regions, but soon the news of the absolute defeat reached Egypt. So Cleopatra hid until she found a strategy to grow her empire. Mark Antony and his loved ones suffered the crisis that plagued the empire, despite any support from her husband. Cleopatra was not the same. After a terrible defeat, her role as a ruler was extraordinary, and the struggle to grow her empire was tireless, but it was not enough. Octavian had conquered Egypt, and the rule of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Hanging in the balance was Octavia's desire to end Cleopatra's power. Octavian sent a terrible message to the ruler, saying that he would forgive him if he murdered his lover. The sovereign did not respond to the terrible proposal of the Romans and decided to flee with his army because they were very close to Alexandria. When Cleopatra sought a safe refuge, false news arrived in the years of Marcus. Antony was told that the forces of Octavian had attacked and killed the ruler of Egypt when, hearing the news, he called the name of his beloved and, in tears, unsheathed his sword and dropped it on his breast. For when his beloved Cleopatra was dead, he had nothing left to live for. Fortunately, Antonio's hard blow didn't kill her, but it did seriously injure her, causing her to lose too much blood and requiring several doctors to attend. A speedy messenger ran across town to find Mark Antony, who knew his whereabouts. His beloved and wanted to deny the news of his death, and when he found the Roman, he was already very bleeding and weak, but he was still conscious. Then he told him, "Sarah Queen is alive, she managed to escape." The breath of life ran through the body of Mark Antony, who knows that his beloved is alive and does not want to die. He asks to be taken into the arms of Cleopatra so that they can finally be together when they meet Cleopatra and run into her arms. He was too weak, and the pain was unrelenting, but he was content because he knew his beloved was by his side. Mark Antony breathed his last in Cleopatra's arms and begged his beloved to surrender to Octavian. To save her life, she died, ending the story with her longing for her beloved Mark Antony. Cleopatra's despair was uncontrollable because a few days later she received word that Octavian had killed her beloved son Caesarion. The Egyptian's pain was too great, causing him several serious health problems. Cleopatra fell into a fatal depression because she had lost her beloved Antony, her son, and she did not know what would become of him. Empire, although he had several doctors at his service, did not want to be treated because he wanted to die, believing he had nothing to fight for, but Octavian did not want Cleopatra to die. So he forced him to seek medical attention until he recovered completely, which he did not. He threatened to murder her children, so Cleopatra was left with no other choice. Octavian later cornered Cleopatra in Alexandria, marking the end of her reign as the most powerful woman in Egypt. Octavian locked him up as a hostage and kept him under constant surveillance as a sign of victory. Cleopatra tried to commit suicide several times because Octavian sent them to Rome to raise her sister, Octavia, so Cleopatra felt her fatal defeat and wanted to die. Until 9 days after the death of Mark Antony, they came to Cleopatra's room and found him dead on an elegant sofa. The Egyptian leader was dressed in a beautiful dress with various ornaments of gold rings, which seemed to be prepared for his death. It is said that her death was caused by the bite of a poisonous snake, while others claim that it was caused by Cleopatra taking deadly poison and committing suicide. The truth is that Cleopatra's death was very painful for all of Egypt and many of her loyalists. Allies, because she proved to be a great woman and a great ruler. The funeral rites dedicated to the great ruler of Egypt were elegant and fulfilled the queen's wishes, as she wished to be buried next to her beloved Mark Antony when she died. Cleopatra's strategic and efficient skills stood out among female rulers, and her monarchy was impressive.